Hi everyone, I hope you all had a great Pesach. This week's Parsha is Parshat Shmini. And in this week's Parsha, we are introduced to the laws of kashrus, which we've spoken about several times in the past, the kosher laws. And the reason in the Torah for these kosher laws is not given famously, right? The kosher laws are called a chok. And as well, another part in this week's Parsha, following we had this episode of Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron. They bring this foreign offering to the Mishkan, and the fire ends up swallowing them up, and they end up dying. And the consequence of that is that the Kohanim, the priests, it says explicitly in the Torah, aren't allowed to drink wine or any kind of alcoholic beverage. It's a sheikhar before they do the temple service. Now one can infer, but as well over there it's called a chok, something that we don't necessarily know the reason to. Now in both cases we see with kashrut all the time, with kosher laws, people infer the reason for why we practice these kosher laws. And so too with the Kohanim, the priests, not being able to drink alcohol before doing the priestly service, we can infer reasons why from context, and we could also logically think of things. But I think there's a more interesting dynamic at play here with these chukim, with these laws that don't have explicit reasoning stated in the Torah. Now let's take a child, for example. A child is hungry, it's dessert at the meal, and he's already had 4 cookies. There's a bunch of cookies left on the table still. And he thinks to himself, you know what? I really want a 5th cookie. I'm gonna eat a 5th cookie. I have a desire to eat a 5th cookie. But then, his mother taps him on the shoulder and says, maybe it's not a good idea to eat the 5th cookie. And the child then displays an act of self-control and decides not to eat the 5th cookie based on the advice of his mother. And I'd argue that this is similar to chukim, for example. And the easiest way to convey this is in the laws of kashrus, of kosher laws. We can have so many, right? What the Torah is telling us is there are so many situations in our lives where we'd be able to find ourselves in settings where we have choices of what we want to eat, thankfully. Right? We could choose to eat meat, we could choose to eat milk, we could choose to eat a whole bunch of different things. But the act of self-control in these instances where we say, you know what, I'm only going to eat meat separate from milk, and I'm only going to eat these certain meat products that were treated a certain way, that were handled by certain people and sold at certain places, right? And you can keep going on and on and on. And that act of self-control is essentially, obviously, it's not the reason why per se. We don't know the reason why, but it's a common trend throughout all of these chukim, that all of these chukim being these mitzvot that we do without any stated reason, that they're all acts of one. You could argue that they're all acts of self-control. Same with the priests drinking alcohol before they do the temple service. Connecting it to Pesach, which just ended a few hours ago here, at Leila Seder, the night of the Seder, famously, the child at the table gets up and says these questions. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh? What makes this night different than all other nights? We just go through it. We go through the rhythms without thinking about it, but the child says ma nishtana, not lama. The child says what makes this night different than all other nights, and not why is this night different than all other nights. And it really connects well to this theme of chukim and self-control, not having explicit reasoning for what the Torah is telling us to do. The Torah says you can't eat chametz on Pesach, you can't eat leavened bread, you have to eat matzah. Okay, we acknowledge that the Seder, but we don't ask why. We ask what makes this night different than all other nights, acknowledging that the difference maker of this night is because the Torah explicitly told us to not eat chametz on Pesach, not for any rational reason, but for an act of as you can argue, for an act of self-control, to say, I'm not going to eat on Pesach. And again, you can keep going on and on and on, and see that during the Seder, we're very much, the focal point is on what makes this night different than all other nights. And the immediate answer to that is the Torah told us to do something different on this night. And in an act of self-control, across the board, most of us follow exactly what the Torah tells us to do on Leil HaSeder, on Seder night, which is a really, really cool phenomenon. So my bracha to everyone this week is maybe we could take this lesson from Pesach to the rest of our year and really think about, obviously keeping in mind why we do things, but also the fact sometimes that the Torah tells us to do something and we do it, and it's beautiful that we do it because it's an act of self-restraint from doing things that the Torah doesn't want us to do. That could really bolster the way we serve Hashem on our day-to-day. And with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom.